Hey guys, so it's Dr. Ryan, and today we're going to talk about a topic that has been on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and that is COVID, or rather long COVID, the symptoms that persist after infection with SARS-CoV-2 virus. And something of interest is how testosterone plays a role in some of the pathophysiology, or potentially could play a role in terms of beneficial outcomes. And I did a video on this last year, actually back during the advent of the COVID pandemic in 2020, that kind of looked at some of the new articles that were published about comparing the two. Now it's been about 2 years since it was declared the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic. So there's been a flurry of articles out there. And recently, a group of individuals compiled a review article that looked at all of them. And today we're going to kind of talk about that. And we're also going to talk about how TRT may or may not be beneficial for long COVID. And we'll kind of go into some of the studies that talk about that too. So this is a fairly long video. We're going to break it up into two parts. This is part one, and we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about the COVID-19 disease and SARS-CoV-2 virus and how it infects cells, etc. And then the next part, we'll talk a little bit more about the benefits and advantages of testosterone that the paper kind of alluded to, along with its potential benefits in long COVID. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, so the article that we're going to look at is titled Testosterone in COVID-19, an Adversary, Bane, or Comrade, Boon. And this actually was published in Frontiers in Cellular and Infection Microbiology back in September 2021. It's a review article. And so it starts out with the basic overview of COVID-19. So COVID-19, if you guys have been under a rock for the last 2 years, is basically a disease that is comprised of acute systemic disturbances, really secondary to a lot of inflammatory activation, lots of cytokine release, which results in multi-organ damage. It's caused by a particular virus, SARS-CoV-2, or systemic acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. That's what it stands for. The World Health Organization declared it a pandemic back in March 2020. And since at present, so May of this year, there have been 200 million plus cases worldwide with 4 million deaths, according to the WHO. It seems to affect multiple systems, as I mentioned: heart, lung, pancreas, kidney, and testicles. And it does so primarily by binding to a enzyme, angiotensin converting enzyme 2. And it binds to this, and that helps facilitate its entry into cells. And by secondary to binding to angiotensin converting enzyme 2, it causes a decrease in the concentration of that enzyme, which unfortunately seems to increase angiotensin the angiotensin 2 molecule, as well as subsequently increase cytokines. And let's talk a little bit about how that occurs. Well, first of all, where are ACE2 receptors located? Well, they're located all over the body. And this is a great diagram that kind of illustrates some of the organ systems that where it's in great abundance. And you can see in the gonads, both in the ovaries, as well as the testicles and the skin, the GI system, the pancreas, the stomach, the heart, the oral cavity, the thyroid, the eyes, the brain, the nasal cavity, the lungs, the liver. It doesn't appear to be found a lot in the bones and lymph nodes, but many other places. Okay. And why is this particular, why is SARS-CoV-2 binding to ACE2 enzyme so important? Well, this is somewhat of a complicated schematic. It's the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So basically, this is a very important system in the body that helps regulate blood pressure. Just a very basic overview. When you have low volume states, what happens is you have decreased perfusion all over the body, but in the kidney, when it senses decreased blood flow to kidney arteries or arterioles, it will actually release a molecule called renin. And renin is actually an enzyme that breaks angiotensinogen, which is a large molecule, to angiotensin 1. Angiotensin is produced in the liver. Angiotensin 1 is then converted to angiotensin 2. And this is the molecule of interest here. And it's converted by angiotensin converting enzyme 1 right here. And so it's angiotensin converting enzyme 1 is of interest. But remember, SARS-CoV-2 binds to angiotensin converting enzyme 2. And there's another diagram that illustrates why that's important. Okay, so angiotensin 2, it tends to cause a lot of good things. If you are hypovolemic and low blood pressure, you have low blood volume, maybe you're dehydrated, maybe lost blood volume. It seems to increase sympathetic activity, which may cause a vasoconstriction or increase your heart rate and blood pressure. It can increase sodium absorption, which helps increase tonic pressure within the vessels. It will increase aldosterone, which does many of the same things. It will directly cause arterial vasoconstriction, and it will increase ADH secretion, which appears to increase water absorption in the collecting duct of the nephrons. Okay, so great. This will definitely help you if you have low blood pressure. Now, this is kind of a little bit of a complicated diagram, but here are some familiar molecules: angiotensinogen, renin, angiotensin 1. Remember, this is released by the liver. This is released by the kidney. This is angiotensin 1, that first enzyme. And then here is our ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme 1, right, which converts it to angiotensin 2. And here's angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which converts angiotensin 2 to less active forms, angiotensin 1 through 7, right? So a lot of what we think the pathology surrounding coronavirus 19 disease is due to is because SARS-CoV-2 binds to ACE2 enzymes, decreases the concentration, and then utilizes that binding to help bind to the ACE2 receptor, and then it goes intracellularly and replicates. Well, by virtue of the fact that this enzyme is decreased, you have more angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2, as we remember, increases water retention, increases sodium retention, but in higher concentrations is very pro-inflammatory and cause fibrosis and even cause pro-apoptosis, which is cell death. And this, long-term, with very high concentrations is toxic to the body and cause severe lung injury and well, honestly, organ injury wherever these ACE2 receptors are. And as we had demonstrated, ACE2 receptor expression is all over the body, right? So it can affect all of these organ systems, at least the ones in green. Okay, and so the article kind of posits this controversy because some articles out there that they looked at in this review article suggested that testosterone or low testosterone is linked to morbidity and mortality in COVID-19. Schroeder et al. In 2020 illustrated that low testosterone serum levels is linked to SARS-CoV-2 infections, as well as severity of COVID-19 disease in ICU patients, these critically ill patients. Okay. On the other hand, Wambier et al. In 2020 revealed that high testosterone and other androgen serum levels may increase the severity of COVID-19. So that seems weird. So if low testosterone increases severity, how can high testosterone do it? Well, this individual feels that he noted that there was augmentation of a particular protein, transmembrane protease serine 2. And this particular protein helps facilitate entry of the SARS-CoV-2 virus into cells via the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. Okay, so what's that? Well, these spike proteins are proteins on the outer edge of the virus, right? You have the viral envelope here, and these are spike proteins, and they're very important in binding to the ACE2 receptor. Remember the SARS-CoV-2 virus that will bind to the ACE2 receptor, also bind, of course, to ACE2 enzyme, and this will allow it to go intracellularly. Well, if you kind of do a little zoom in of a cell membrane, and there's an ACE2 receptor, is a particular cell where ACE2 receptors are high, and let's just say that the testes, because as we know, the gonads are one of those areas. Here is our protein TMP RSS2, and this apparently potentiates the ability of the spike protein to bind to the ACE2 receptor, right? So there have been a few studies that suggested that testosterone may increase this particular protein, expression of this protein. So that is one reason why testosterone might be bad. Okay, and then just a quick overview of how these vaccines that we have gotten work, right? And so we talked a little bit about the spike protein, right? So most of the COVID-19 viruses are mRNA viruses, right? And so what does that mean? mRNA stands for messenger ribosomal nucleic acid. And what is that really? Well, it's essentially a message to the ribosomes, like these protein factories within the cell that essentially create proteins, to create a particular protein. And it's a particular message that when it's absorbed into the cells, goes to the ribosomes, creates a SARS-CoV-2 spike proteins, right? And so the cell starts producing a bunch of these spike proteins. And then your lymphocytes will then go ahead and create antibodies, or B cells will create antibodies, but lymphocytes will take a look at this particular antigen and in conjunction with B cells, create antibodies to it. And so the idea is you've been exposed to the spike protein, and you already have antibodies. And so now when you get the virus or you get infected with the virus, you have antibodies already that will help clear the infection. And so that's how the vaccines are purported to work. Okay, then finally, let's talk a little bit about long COVID or post-COVID syndrome. So this is something that's become of interest recently because unfortunately, many people have been infected with SARS-CoV-2 and they seem to do okay. They obviously didn't feel, many people were asymptomatic or didn't feel good while they're infected, but they tend to recover. But certain individuals tended to have chronic, conditions even after 4 weeks after being infected. And so typically most people clear the infection by then, right? And this is becoming more and more prominent as more and more people are infected with the virus. There isn't a test to diagnose post-COVID conditions. So this is not really a test to tell you if you have this syndrome. And it's kind of, it's a little bit vague. There are many symptoms that correlate with it. Here are some of the symptoms that the CDC has put out. So general symptoms: fatigue, symptoms that get worse after physical and mental efforts, or post-exertional malaise, fever, okay. Difficulty breathing or shortness of breath, chest pain, fast beating or pounding hearts, palpitations, difficulty concentrating, dizziness, depression or anxiety, okay, diarrhea and stomach pain, and then joint or muscle pain, as well as changes in menstrual cycles. So lots of different symptoms that are associated with this. So this is also concerning because, this seems to be a chronic thing. It doesn't seem to really go away. A lot of people unfortunately have this. And apparently it's soon to be, or it may already be, a disability that is recognized under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it's kind of a big deal. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about the methods, and I think we'll stop with part one at this point. So the methods involved with this particular study, again, the study was a review article that looked at many of the articles involving testosterone COVID-19. There were 20 in total, okay? And they went ahead, a search of PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science, Google Scholar, and Science Direct, so just all these research databases, and went ahead and reviewed and summarized the findings. We're going to go ahead and start with testosterone acute lung injury in the next video. So stay tuned for part two.